Good afternoon, everybody. We'll start in a couple of minutes. Make yourselves comfortable. Well, we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brooke Horowitz, and I am Business Integrity Advisor to UNDP's Promoting Fair Business in ASEAN, or FairBiz Project. It's a great pleasure for me to be your moderator for this conversation, Leading with Integrity. How doing business with integrity can transform Asia. And at the same time, we're going to be launching the Business Integrity Toolkit for young entrepreneurs. This is a joint event of two UNDP projects, FairBiz and Youth CoLab. I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the UK government's Prosperity Fund ASEAN Economic Reform Programme, which supports FairBiz, and the Citi Foundation, which is co-lead of Youth CoLab. Now, a few technical notes. We have a great audience from over 40 countries. Please use the chat to introduce yourselves to each other now. I can see you've already started doing that, but don't just say hello. Say what your name is and which country you come from, and it'll be a way for everybody to introduce each other. Now, while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce our speakers for today. Eddie Tai, General Partner of 500 Startups Vietnam. He's a global venture capitalist, and he'll be our keynote speaker. Eddie, just wave to everybody so they can see you. Excuse me. We've got Diane Eustachio, Executive Director of Idea Space Foundation. She's a startup enabler and incubator. Diane, hello. And she's from the Philippines. Edmund Yap, co-founder, business catalyst at Pew Pew Creative Agencies. You have to say that correctly. It's Pew Pew. And he's a serial. Did I get that right, Edmund?
Correct. Pew Pew.
Yeah.
Right there.
And he's a serial social entrepreneur, as the creative agency Pew Pew name would suggest. And Phi Van Nguyen. She's the chairwoman of the Saigon Innovation Hub. She's an angel investor. And Ruel Amparo, CEO at Cropital, entrepreneur from Philippines. Sorry, I should have said Edmund's from Malaysia, Phi is from Vietnam. We've also got Kong Tang Huynh Tang, who is co-founder of InnoLab.Asia and he's an entrepreneur, advisor, and mentor. And I think he's, if he's not on right now, he'll be coming on soon. Same with Kara Owen, the British High Commissioner to Singapore, who will be giving the sort of final concluding note at the end of our session together today. Now, a couple of instructions. You can continue to use the chat to comment on the discussion as it's happening, but that is a discussion amongst yourselves. So, you know, we want this to be as interactive as possible. But if you want to interact with us, the panelists and the speakers, then please use the Q&A function. With the Q&A, I can't promise that we'll have time to get to your questions or comments, but we'll try. But if you can upvote each other's comments so that, you know, if you see somebody else has said something that you would like to say, instead of just repeating it and it getting lost in the long list of comments that I hope there will be, you will be able to make sure that that gets to the top of the list. I can't promise that we'll be able to discuss them, but by all means, put your comments and questions in the Q&A function if you'd like the panelists to discuss it. Now, here's the agenda for today. This is the short introduction, and I'm going to hand over immediately to Eddie Tai for the keynote speech. Then I'll give a short presentation about the Business Integrity Toolkit. Then we'll have our conversation with essentially everybody. And then the High Commissioner, the British High Commissioner for Singapore, Kara Owen, will officially launch the toolkit, and then I'll come back with a few conclusions. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We should finish promptly at 2:15 ICT, and I think we should just get on with it now. So let me introduce Eddie Tai. Eddie's a partner with 500 Startups. It's a global early stage venture capitalist firm and ecosystem builder headquartered in Silicon Valley. He's focused on investing in Vietnam's next great tech startups, as well as supporting 500 Startups offerings in ecosystem development. He's very active in a whole lot of fora, including this one. And now I'm delighted to hand over to Eddie.
Thanks a bunch, Brooke. Happy to be here with everybody. And I'd like to start us off by sharing a little bit about my family's story. We're originally from the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, and I'll go a couple generations back. Actually, my grandfather was in the Mekong Delta, and he was actually orphaned by age 12, unfortunately, but he managed to survive and get by as a farmhand, and eventually grew up, got married, and started a family on a modest plot of land in the Delta. And the whole family worked hard in the fields, the rice fields. But his eldest son, my father, did more than that. He, you know, was raised as the eldest as to be particularly honest and hardworking and fair. So he also worked hard in the classroom to do more. And he got a scholarship to study in Saigon, now Ho Chi Minh City, and became the first in our family to go to college. He worked his way up to become a mid-level bureaucrat and was on the fast track to be a provincial leader, provincial government leader. But that's where things became more difficult because, as perhaps some of you know in your own home countries, some people around in the government, inside and outside, prioritize things besides doing the right thing, or in addition to doing the right thing. So bribery and other forms of rent seeking were common around him. And one day somebody came to him, actually he tells me the story, it's a cigar box full of cash. And that's when he was confronted directly with the cold hard choice. Does he accept the bribe and become a part of the system? Does he fight the system and maybe get beaten down because a lot of people are in the system? Or does he leave the system? And ultimately he kind of did a hybrid in his mind at the time, which was to study abroad. So he went to study in the US and get a graduate degree, partly to delay the fight, quote unquote, until later, but also to better equip himself for the fight when it came. But before he could finish his PhD program, the war here ended and he was stuck in the US, stuck on the other side of the world from his home and his family. He felt alone and lost. I'll pause that for now and come back to it towards the end. That was years ago, but it very well could have happened today. I think maybe many of you can identify similar stories in your own lives or family and friends. And I start with that to say that I know that, from these stories and others in our family history and in my own personal experience, that doing the right thing can feel hard and be hard and doesn't always result in the preferred outcome. But despite that, what I'll share with you is I think it's important to do the right thing anyways. And in the long run, the arc of the universe bends towards justice. So let me go into each of these pieces, and then we'll be jumping into the group discussion to go into more detail. So integrity can be challenging, right? So there's in English a saying, the nail that sticks out gets hammered. I'm sure in many other languages there are similar phrases, but basically the one who acts differently from everybody else can get punished. And that was that can be something that can make it feel hard to do the right thing. It's also intellectually sometimes difficult. The best outcome from an integrity perspective isn't always crystal clear, although I think it's usually clearer than not. It's not one and done. It's not like you can decide on one action or one thought and then you never have to think about integrity again. It requires a lot of effort over a long period of time. And despite that long effort, sometimes, although we like to say when we're kids, and again in English, cheaters never prosper, sometimes they do, unfortunately. So it's no wonder that some people find it hard to do business and to live with integrity. But when we start to look at the benefits of living with integrity and doing business with integrity, I think it becomes clear why it makes sense to equip ourselves to make the right choices and to be consistent with those choices. Of course, as the title of the event suggested, as each individual person in our communities behaves with integrity, we will gradually change the community itself, and we will no longer be the nail sticking out, but actually all the nails will be sticking out, and we'll be able to move things forward together. And in the meantime, being that one who lives with integrity and works with integrity actually can increase your chances of winning sustainably, at least in the fields I'm familiar with in many aspects of business and investment. What does it mean then? As I get to how that'll help, let me kind of clarify how I see business integrity. It's very broad. It's not just anti-corruption, right? It's not just, to me, saying no to that cigar box of money, or paying off that particular person to make your life easier. But it's actually broader than that. It's running your business across the board with honesty and fairness with all your stakeholders, business partners, employees, customers, investors. So it comes down to how you actually develop your corporate culture, and then your processes, and then your decisions along the way. So how can it help tangibly? I see it in two categories, as with my VC hat on. One is access to resources, and the other is managing risks. So in terms of accessing resources, especially international investors, I think many of us are in these emerging markets like Vietnam, where I'm in right now, the Philippines and so on. There actually isn't as much local investor money as there is international money interested in investing in the right opportunities. And so accessing that extra money it will be helpful to be a business person of integrity to access that money. Firstly, because a lot of international investors literally cannot engage in bribery. US investors have what's called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act that prevents them from investing in businesses that don't do integrity and engaging in corruption, more specifically. But also competitive differentiation. So if I'm an outside investor and I'm looking at like 5 companies, five entrepreneurs doing the same thing, and 4 of them are acting without integrity, and you are the one that is willing to have the courage to do what's right consistently, obviously you're the one that's going to stand out to me. Similarly with international customers, similar concepts that customers internationally want to do business with counterparties who they can trust to do the right thing. So I think overall, if you're trying to build something of massive success and scale, behaving with integrity is explicitly very important there. And then in terms of managing risks as well, a lack of integrity catches up to you. You know, the communities are small, people talk, numbers can be fudged, but they catch up with you eventually. It's hard to hide the truth forever. We see examples of this every day. I think the most notorious recent example is Luckin Coffee in China, which obviously IPO'd, but then has since, it's been revealed that their financials were inflated by orders of magnitude. Now their executives have had to resign and they're being charged with crimes. So it's just, makes sense from a risk mitigation perspective. So to be clear with 500, we will not invest in founders that behave dishonestly, that have bad business practices, that violate ESG standards. And often we have seen that founders that we have declined as a result of this, sometimes they're able to raise a round, some capital from somebody, but again, just like I said before, it catches up with them. It's hard to mask, it's hard to hide the truth, right? And so for us, we're proud to say that when we pick these founders, still entrepreneurship is hard and startups fail often, but our companies often succeed, and our fund performance so far is pretty much best in class in our region. So it is paying off for us as an investor. And like I said, most businesses fail. So there's a common statistic, 95% of tech startups fail in the first year. Similar stats for cafes and restaurants and all kinds of businesses. The entrepreneur will survive and do the next thing. That's what we entrepreneurs do. An investor like us, 500, we'll back an entrepreneur again even if you failed, as long as you were honest and earnest in your efforts. We will not back an entrepreneur who did not do business with integrity. So back an entrepreneur again who did not do business with integrity. If we found out during our relationship with them that they were dishonest, that will ruin the chances of another shot with us. So there are very real business considerations for why doing business with integrity is very important. So now, one last set of comments before I wrap up here is ways to ensure integrity. And of course, this session is all about that. And the UNDP Toolkit provides a lot of helpful guidance and resources as well. But I wanted to share like 5 quick high-level principles that have helped me. Number 1, be clear about your values. Understand what they are. Think about them deeply and how they might be applied. Number 2, bias towards transparency. And what I mean is, there's an explicit test I use, which is the news headline test. Whenever I act or decide or talk, I try to imagine what would the world, what would my business partners, investors, etc., think if it were on, the New York Times or the SCMP or the Wall Street Journal the next day. If I could feel comfortable with that and know that whatever it is I did or said was the right thing and I would not feel embarrassed about it, then that's good. And if I would feel uncomfortable with it, then I should think twice about what it is I'm doing. Third, avoid sticky situations. Easy enough. Fourth, understand in advance what you'll do if you're in a sticky situation. And for me, for example, that even came down to, okay, when I decided to do this business in this market, knowing that I could be a nail that sticks out and gets hammered down, and what would I be willing to do? Would I be willing to walk away and fail in the face of that? And my answer was yes. And finally, most importantly, find good examples and advisors that can serve as inspiration. And for me, that's my father, and I'll tell you why in a bit. But let's wrap up here. A lot of people mention a quote by Mahatma Gandhi, the famous Indian rights activist, about the challenge of doing the right thing. He says, First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. It actually originated in a business context. The American union leader, Nicholas Klein, back in 1914, said this about laborers who were contemplating organizing for proper labor rights. He had a much longer speech, but it was condensed and then misattributed to Mahatma Gandhi. The point is that the knowledge and strength to act with integrity is as important in business as it is in anything else. Business permeates us all around. We can't say we will be good family people, but not good business people, I think. So going back to that story, my father, he ultimately picked himself up. He realized he had obligations to his family, so he got his PhD, and he spent the remainder of his career teaching about good government. He taught in the classroom, but he also hosted visiting officials from many countries, including Vietnam, to teach best practices. On the side, he worked with my uncle to start buying and renovating real estate in low-income neighborhoods, so to provide affordable housing for folks in these low-income areas. And so his staying true to his values has enabled him to create a ripple effect of those values to people around him. And now, for himself, he's retired in a nice beach house in South Florida, playing with his grandchildren. So it's worked out for him at the end, even though it was obviously a very tough time for him several years ago. And thanks to him, I'm here able to share some of his story and these messages with you. And I hope one day, one of you will be able to share it with my own son. He was just born a couple months ago. And for his Vietnamese name, I just wanted to share with you, I picked the name Jin, which translates to integrity. So very happy to share this aspect of doing business with you. I'm looking forward to chat more with the other panelists here today. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eddie. And I have to say that I didn't invite Eddie to speak because I knew that his son was called Integrity. But that's a very fortunate coincidence, isn't it? And I think you brought out some fantastic topics for our conversation later. I'm gonna just ask our speakers to be patient for a few minutes while I talk a little bit about the toolkit, because that's one of the reasons why we're all here. So the Business Integrity Toolkit for Young Entrepreneurs, you should be able to see the cover page on your screens. This was created over the last few months. We decided to do it in for the Asia Pacific region, and I mean there are a lot of toolkits out there, free toolkits on the internet put out by other international organizations and legal firms and NGOs, but there didn't seem to be anything for young people, and for young people specifically in Asia Pacific. Although I would say that this is applicable to anywhere in the world, but in Asia Pacific. It's 60% of the world's youth. There's a lot of jobless in the region. The entrepreneurship offers a way out, and many people are finding this route. So anything that we can do to help them find the easy way out of poverty and into wealth and into the middle class is a good way of doing it. The region has got one of the highest young startup rates across the globe. And so this is a good reason to focus on this region. What is in this toolkit? Well, it's a very basic introduction to corporate governance, to how to do business properly. Of course, it's about values, and that is the very important message that I got from Eddie just now, but it's how you translate those values into an organization, and that is not so simple. Now, big companies have got lawyers, they've got compliance officers, they've got risk management systems, they've got internal control systems, and it's a whole industry around corporate management. But for a small company, you don't have to have all of that. You just have to have the basics, and that's what we try to communicate in the toolkit. Now, the toolkit is written in a very simple language. We've tried to avoid any kind of business jargon or legal jargon. We know that you don't have much time anyway to read this kind of thing. So we've kept it very short and simple. It's highly interactive. You can go into a topic and read about it, and then there's a toolbox where which you can click and go to a more detailed page, and that will also then take you out into the outside world, as it were, to various useful sources of information. Today it's in English. It's going to be translated into several languages. You can see the QR code on the page there, and you can just use that to get through to the link to our business integrity page. And once you're there, you will be able to download the toolkit. So what we would ask you to do is take a look at it. If it's useful to you, share it with your colleagues in your company, share it with your business partners. You know, it takes two to tango, even more indeed, because there's absolutely no point in you unilaterally behaving to the highest possible standards of integrity if everybody else is behaving in some other way. So, you know, please spread the word. Make sure that your business partners understand that you're working according to these principles and the practice of these principles, and get it out there. Now, before I'm not going to go into any more detail, because I really think it's self-explanatory and you'll be able to look at it yourselves. But I do want to just take this opportunity of thanking a few people who contributed to this. First of all, my co-authors, Hafan Han from Vietnam, and Jane Usifo, my colleague here in London, and also our designer Long Viet Thang Tung, also in Ho Chi Minh City. It was a bigger effort than just the four of us. We did a training session on business integrity for young entrepreneurs in August last year in Bangkok for Youth CoLab, and there were about 30 people there. It was, you know, quite fun. I think everybody enjoyed it, but we decided to create this toolkit at that point, and a number of the participants then helped to co-create it, providing case studies, which you will find in there. So a big thank you to them and to the whole group of August last year. I think many of you are on today. Thank you for your inspiration and for helping making it happen. And I hope you will find it useful in your future careers. So that's the toolkit. Now we'll be officially launching that later with the help of the British High Commissioner to Singapore. That will be our official sort of culmination of today's meeting. But now I'd like to go straight through to what you've all been waiting for, which is the conversation and our speakers. Now, I've introduced everybody. Tang, you weren't there right at the beginning, but you're there now. So welcome again, everybody. And let me just start off with a question to Diane. Now, we've been through this COVID-19 pandemic. Some countries are still going through it, but what difference does that make to the need to discuss business integrity now?
Hello, hi everyone. It's much more important now because in this time of the pandemic and people are maybe anxious, they feel that there's a lot of frenzy and people may tend to take shortcuts, and sometimes these shortcuts lead us to integrity issues. And the pandemic is not going to be here to stay forever. So when this is over, and if we took shortcuts today, we may not feel the effects tomorrow or maybe in the coming months, but we may probably feel the effects of these shortcuts in the future. So for an entrepreneur, a good entrepreneur always takes the long view. He or she always has to see things more intergenerationally and in the long term. So this is why integrity is probably even more important to talk about now in this era of the CE COVID era.
Yes, see the COVID era, or is it BC and AC? Before COVID and after COVID.
After COVID,
yeah. Let me just ask Edmund. I mean, do you find that because of the pandemic, things have become more short-term, and there is this pressure on smaller companies to take shortcuts, as Diane was indicating? And come off mute, please. Don't forget to come off mute.
Well, I can't really comment so much about the pandemic, but I will say, however, that, Diane, you talked about shortcuts, right? And the problem with shortcuts is that if we take shortcuts, we don't actually learn to be an entrepreneur. I mean, we learn to be able to take money from corrupt sources, money that we don't deserve. And because of that shortcut, we don't actually learn the skills of marketing, right? We don't learn the skills of how to get business. We don't learn how to sell. And so, yes, short term, great. I mean, the pocket's full. But guess what? You won't have the skills to be able to last the distance. And you certainly won't be able to pass on those skills to your kids.
Yes, and Fee, I see you nodding there. Do you agree with that? When you're investing, you're a business angel, and when you're investing in companies, do you find that a lot of the young people are kind of impatient and have a short-term view, pandemic or no pandemic? Do you try to educate them to take the longer view?
I love Edmund's comment, because I think I pretty much look at the entrepreneurs the same way. I mean, the pandemic is already tough enough, and it shows very, very clearly that if you don't build your foundation, you don't have the skills, you don't build the skill sets to move forward and to integrate into the new world, you basically finished. If you bank on relationships and corruption and on the table money to actually make money and, flourish, then obviously the pandemic has given you a very, very tough lesson of what to do and what not to do to be able to integrate later on. Secondly, as an investor, I don't want to be cheated, right? So first of all, I have to find people who won't cheat me to invest into, let alone talking about, the bigger problem of, best practices towards the community and the society altogether. So for entrepreneurs who are out there, who are looking for what Eddie says about as accessing capital, accessing resources, this is the thing. This is the business integrity that takes you forward. If you don't have it, if you don't practice it, then obviously us investors, whether angel investors or VCs, we don't want to really talk to you and don't want to support you, don't want to mentor you and take you forward.
Yeah, and I mean, while you mentioned that, Fee, and this is probably a question for Eddie as well. I mean, when you're looking at whom to invest in, how do you assess whether they've got the right values? I mean, is it just by talking to them, or do you have some system to measure it? I mean, there's all sorts of self-assessment tools out there. Some of which you can get access to through the Business Integrity Toolkit. But I mean, or is it subjective, or is there an objective measure of this?
I can try first. Of course, can't put a score on somebody's integrity, unfortunately. But there are things. Some founders make it really easy for us to identify them as not having integrity. There was an entrepreneur who spoke with one of my team members, one of my women team members, and started, saying inappropriate things to her, we'll say. So that's instantly, gone. So the negative screen is pretty easy in that case. The next level is around honesty and consistency, right? So, they can make some claims, and then there are ways to verify that later. they say they're in deep talks with so-and-so. This is a small market. I can actually easily reach out to so-and-so and say, oh, are they in negotiation with a contract with you or something like that? Or, I find out that they have multiple books. This is actually common in many markets. You have like the book that you use for the government for tax purposes, and then you have the accounting books you use for yourself, and then you have the accounting. So like somebody who has one set of books is obviously more likely to be acting with integrity. So, but it goes fundamentally back to Phi Van's point, which is at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the person's not going to cheat us and they're going to grow sustainably, as Edmund said. And if somebody's willing to lie, cheat, or steal with that person over there, what's to say they're not going to turn around and lie, cheat, and steal with me? So there are multiple things we look at for that.
Yeah, what about you, Phi? Would you like to add to that?
I think Eddie and we talked about the two sets of books a lot, so I second that comment. We do look at financial reports to actually identify whether there's business integrity there, but there's also the qualitative way of doing it, where we spend time with the founders and talk about business development and talk about opportunities in the future, and say, okay, if there is an opportunity like this, this big, and we need to really do some bribery, or we have to, send presents to someone, or do some other interesting stuff around it. What do you think? Should we do it? Should we not do it? Should we take the opportunity? And through those conversations, you learn the answers, and you learn how people think and how people would like to behave in front of a huge opportunity ahead of them. So there's the quantitative and there's the qualitative ways of doing things, and but you can only find out integrity through talking and interacting a lot with the founders.
Yes, well, thank you very much. That's really fascinating. But there is an objective numerical value that you can put on integrity in the world of entrepreneurs, which is, do you have more than one set of accounts? If you do, then we're not investing. Okay, let me turn to Ruel now in Philippines. I'm very interested in how young entrepreneurs such as yourself can contribute to this change of culture. Because as I said before, it's all very well each of us doing our own thing, but if this doesn't get transmitted to the broader business community, to your partners, your suppliers, your distributors, then we're fighting the losing battle. And it can be quite discouraging to be surrounded by a corrupt environment. So, Ruel, I mean, how do you manage this, and how are you able to contribute to creating an environment where business is done with integrity?
Sure. So my point of view would be on my end as a young entrepreneur who had his first business, basically. So actually, it really has to start within yourself as the organization before you could actually influence other youth or other individuals to actually follow the same thing. Basically, do what you need, do what you preach. But on the other end, on my side, we deal in agriculture, or our company is in agriculture, and this is also highly political as a field. And one thing that we made to ourselves clear is that we need to surround ourselves with the right people, with the right mindset, so that we could learn business practices from these people who are already vetted in business ethics. So in our end, from the employees, from the senior management team, down to the advisors, we really open up the conversation about business integrity. What would you do if this happens, And from there, we kind of understand who we should spend more time with and we should spend a bit less time with. And at the same time, we trust the people whom those people we trust, basically. It's a network, or it's a chain of good people, or people with the right attitude towards business. So basically for me, it's really surrounding yourself with the right people. And from there, you find the right supplier, you find your right customers, you find the right mentors, and so on and so forth, and it follows.
Yeah, great. And Tang, in Vietnam, what about yourself? I mean, how do you, I mean, you don't want to impose your views on other people, and you may make a lot of, you may lose a lot of friends if you do that. But on the other hand, how do you select the people you work with, and how do you explain what your values are?
You know, like it's hard at first. You know, like as I have a background that I was educated in Vietnam, and I work in an international environment, so I have to interact with many people. And the funny thing is that I don't really listen with the reaction at first, but I'm trying to listen to understand them and observe the action later, how they treat their friend, their partner. And then through the filter of interaction with many people, and then I circle those who share the same value with what I have, and I share with them what I believe. And then, you know, like it's like a law of attraction. And then I work with the people that actually they walk the talk, and that's how I get it. It's like how I started the Give It Back project, because you know, like I still do the business, and when I said that I want to do fundraising to support the crying old men who crying on the street with unsold lottery ticket. And at that time, a lot of people say, hey, you are a businessman, and if you do fundraising like that, so how can you get with the money when people point to you? And you know, like I have to show them that we have to do with transparency. So the money that people transfer is not go to me. So it's have to go to a third party where you can do the auditing, you can check. So that's why Give It Back project, we do the mentoring one-on-one. The mentor, as my friend, you come here, you can give your time for free, and the mentee who contribute the money directly to those who most need it. And that kind of fund, everyone can check that. So that's
Okay,
how
I'm sorry, I just need to interrupt you there for a second, but
yeah,
I mean, you know, you're a social entrepreneur, and I mean, this is a very exciting social entrepreneur model that you've got, but how do you make it, can you make any money doing that? Or isn't, I mean, I know that might not be the aim, but you still need to keep the business afloat. You still need to get funding to come in, and you need to live yourself. So you know, I have to ask that question, because we can't be selfless. If we're in business, we are in business in a way to make money as well. Even if it's we're not going to try and get rich, but we want to try and live. So how do you wear that?
You know, like because we will have some of the business where we get the revenue into. So like the training in other country, or we have the training in Vietnam. So that's how we get the source of income. But for those like a project like that, we want to keep it totally transparent and totally clear to people. So instead of, I can like get the money directly to us, and then we get like a 5% for operation cost. But you know, like the trust, it can be very gluten at first, because you know, like when you do something like this, it have to be clear 100%, and then you can, if the trust was built already, then you can share it. I don't want to like mess around with people, especially a lot of people who follow me and trust me for what I'm saying, and the message should be clear. So that's why the money should be come from at first to the third party, where you can check, audit that, and that's how we can do it. Yes, I totally agree with that. We have to survive anyway, so I still have business that I still have the function that we still earn the money from other sources. Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And it's wonderful to see you in an airport. I haven't seen an airport for about 4 months. It looks like there are quite a few people there, but of course that's Vietnam, which is the model country for dealing with pandemics. And
Yeah.
if you ever want to be safe next time, just go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Edmund, I mean, what about you? You know, what I'm hearing is internal values, surround yourself with the right people, share your experience. But in Malaysia, for example, where you're based, are there any facilities to help teach business integrity? Are there any resources where would you advise people to go to if they wanted to know more? I mean, apart from our business integrity toolkit, of course.
Oh gosh, I don't know where to go to myself. So there's no way I can answer that question. Because I mean, unfortunately, Malaysia isn't the best example, right? I mean, we hear news of the big 1MDB scandals, huge, massive corruption everywhere. I used to be a civil engineer, and one of the reasons why I left is because of the massive systematic corruption there was in the entire infrastructure sector. So if you ask me where to go, unfortunately, I can't answer that. However, I can talk about how young entrepreneurs would be able to avoid getting into such a position in the first place. And that is to understand how to see possibilities and how to see opportunities. A lot of people get into corruption because, well, they don't see any other opportunities, right? They see this, what was that? A cigar box full of money in front of them. And, you know, Eddie's grandfather had that moral compass to be able to say no, right? But for a lot of people who's, like, for example, right now, if they're struggling and suddenly they see a box of money in front of them, what do, right? Now, another way to get a box of money in front of you is to know how to see and find opportunities, to know how to look at problems, see the possibility in how we can solve those problems and actually turn that into a business. Now, in that case, in Malaysia, there's quite a few organizations that do that. You know, there's one of the biggest ones is called Magic. It's a government, I guess partially government-run organization that trains entrepreneurs in how they can see opportunities and how they can chase after opportunities. So I guess it's kind of like you get a cigar box with money of corruption, and you get a cigar box, right, that's made with good money, with clean money, with money that fills your soul instead of drains it. And I guess if you ask me, that's the best way for you entrepreneurs to not get sucked down this road into corruption.
Okay, and how do you explain that to other people then?
Oh gosh.
Apart from just, I'm serious. I mean, because it's all very well doing it at a session like this, where we're, you know, essentially, if you're on here, you're converted, right? I don't need to persuade most people on here that integrity is a good thing.
Look, that's your next project, UNDP Toolkit for cigar boxes of good feeling money.
Yeah, Edmund cigar box.
I really like what Ruel said just now, right? And that is, you got to surround yourself with people who have integrity. So the key here is, my cats are fighting. So the key here is,
give them a cigar box.
So the key here is to find a tribe of people like you who really refuse to go down this road of corruption. You hang around each other. You all support each other. You know, not just as friends, but you know, as businesses as well, right? And you get over this hill and this challenge. So yeah, I really like what Ruel said about hanging out with people like you.
So I think in a way, Danielle, who's asked this question about how do you behave with integrity in a environment that is hostile to integrity, I think you've answered that question. Danielle, by the way, one of the contributors to our toolkit. Good to know that you're on the call, Daniel. Let me just come back to Diane. You're doing a lot of coaching and mentoring. So how does this conversation about integrity work with your mentees? I have to say that in my experience of doing some of this stuff in countries which are very hostile to integrity, I sometimes got laughed in my face. I mean, you know, it's just not possible to do business in any other way than in the environment in which we find ourselves. These are the incentives to bribe. That's how you get things done. Give me a break. Do you ever get that attitude from people, and what are the arguments that you use?
Yeah, the scenario I think is common across Southeast Asia. I agree. We have to really surround ourselves with the same people who share the same values. So for idea space and what we do, we have to start with the self. The entrepreneur has to have that level of self-awareness so that he or she can articulate the values that their organization upholds. I think there was a question earlier about saying even your own, what do you do when even your own colleagues don't share the same values? Well, I think I want to send the same question back to the entrepreneur. You know, it has to start from you. If you're not able to articulate it and also select the people who surround you with the same values, then there's a problem in your team. So it's really up to you. You define it as an entrepreneur.
Okay, and people accept that when you're telling them. I mean, do you feel that they're going back to their companies and trying that technique, as it were?
Yeah, you'll just have to bite the bullet. And if you hired someone who doesn't have the same values as you, it's either you accept that person and live with it, or if it's absolutely something you can't live with, then remove the person from your organization, because that's going to be a cancer that you're going to have to deal with all throughout.
Yeah. Actually, I have to say, I did work for a few years for a big US global multinational, and they were very strong on this topic, although they had their problems at various points. But one of the hardest things is when you have a really good performer, you know, you're fantastic sales manager, but that person doesn't have the values. And I'm not talking just, by the way, we're not just talking about bribery here. We're talking about human relationships. We're talking about discrimination. We're talking about how people behave towards ethnic minorities, towards women. I mean, you know, there's a whole lot of issues just in the community of your company. And here, you're right, it has to start from within the company. But still, let's just go a little bit beyond that, because I'm really interested in how can we change society, if you like. I mean, that may seem a bit overambitious, and of course it has to start with ourselves and with our networks. But I'd like to ask Eddie, I mean, do you think there's some way of scaling up this sort of work that's going on at individual level? I mean, we've heard from Edmund, he wouldn't know where to go in Malaysia to find out about business integrity and some of the things that we're trying to teach here. And you know, UNDP probably, for all its ambition, doesn't have the scale to cover the world, although it does pretty well. What's the solution? Can we create a community of young entrepreneurs for integrity? Is that something that would make sense? I mean, how could we do something that would make an impact?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, this is a question well beyond any of our pay grades in the room here. It's a question that has been asked by sociologists and political scientists for decades. How do you transform Singapore, which was previously quite corrupt and dominated by mafias and so on, into a much more fair society? And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer. And frankly, today, although we're talking, a lot of us are in Southeast Asia and we're observing on this current state of things here, I think we can point to a lot of countries around the world and say they haven't figured this out either. Like I think the U.S. doesn't do a good job of teaching business integrity, and it's showing all the way to the top and so on and so forth. So, but I do think whatever the solution looks like in a particular community, it is first and foremost the community. It has to be grassroots, and you know, first individuals equipping ourselves with things like the toolkit, with conversations like this, and demonstrating ourselves as the example, and then slowly finding others or creating others around us that share the same perspectives. And over time, we will find numbers, and there is strength in numbers. And so eventually, as that strength in numbers progresses, and as you see the successes, the unicorns in our industry of success who did things the right way, and we're able to see success larger than anybody else in the community who was doing it the old way, then I think everybody will say, okay, yeah, it makes sense to work and act in this way, because I will be a lot better off, and our community will be a lot better off by working with integrity. So I think the UNDP toolkit's a good step, and rolling that out to individual entrepreneurs, but also other people. Like, it can't just be entrepreneurs, right? It goes back to what I was saying earlier at the start of the session, which is I don't really think about integrity as being siloed as business and then family and then whatever. It's a way of living your values, clean, clear values across every aspect of your life. So, well,
let me just thank you very much, Eddie. Let me just put that to Ruel, because when we were talking a couple of days ago, I got the impression that, you know, there you are in the Philippines, which is a good Catholic country, where, you know, people are actually, I mean, I'm sure that this is the case with all religions, but it is quite strong in Philippines. You know, there's a very strong, you know, moral, ethical code that people get brought up with right from the start. And, you know, clearly that is a grounding for all of this. But then the world of business and government, I suppose, seems to be quite different. So, you know, is there a way of reconciling these? I mean, Eddie's right. It only works if you take the same values across your different parts of life, your family life, your business life. But is that really possible? What would your experience be in the Philippines?
Okay, sure. So, first of all, you're very correct that most of us are actually Catholic, and a good number also of the youth studied in Catholic schools, because that's mostly present in the Philippines. And we learned Catholic values about basically about giving, having integrity, being virtuous, being patient, being kind, all those things. But in terms of translating into business ethics or business value, you're kind of on your own on how you would actually define it or on how you would translate it, because apparently some values are not directly the same. Like being humble. For example, it is very huge in the Philippines or in Catholic school. You need not to brag about being the first honor or having all the awards out there. But out there in the VC world or in the entrepreneurship world, it's sometimes being reflected as not confident about what you can offer in the table. So those things you really need to define on your own. But again, on the side of the business ethics or business integrity, a lot are still applicable. So the things that you learn in school also that teaches you that bribery is bad, cheating is bad. Cheating is actually quite very strong word. It's all encompassing, and it's something that is very strong in, at least in Catholic schools, that we've learned. And cheating could be in form of fraudulent action, taking advantage of the situation, and so on and so forth. So it's actually up to you on how you would define it. But again, at the end of the day, the main challenge for most of us is actually, even though if you, at the basics, you know that it's right or it's wrong, but if you look around what's the business practices that are being done, you kind of double think or rethink whether those values are really correctly interpreted by yourself. The same way humility is being interpreted, and how it actually, instead of getting carrots, you're getting sticks from being very strong on humility and so on. But again, it's all about interpretation and finding the right people who are demonstrating it the right way.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that the picture I'm getting from this conversation is that this is not easy, and we're all rather disposed to being optimistic and believing in what we believe in, but unfortunately, the reality out there is not helpful. And I think that there is a weakness in the system, which is that the individual internal values, they may be translated in your companies and with you, but it's just not big enough to impact society. And I suppose that's where we need to go. Diane, did you want to come in there?
Yes, yeah. I wanted to say something that, yeah, it's really a tough road to traverse. And I think in the end, it's integrity is also equal to authenticity. Are you happy with yourself? In the end, with the choices you make, can you live with the choices you make? To face people with the choices that you make, the decisions that you make. How authentic are you to yourself? Because in the end, and I don't want to really sound religious or spiritual here. I'm 53 and I've seen a lot of people dying in front of me with family members and friends. You know, when they are towards the end of life, there's just something that happens to their soul. I don't know what, it just goes on hyperdrive, and it's a cleansing process. So if you lived your life with so many things to untangle, in the end, there won't be enough time to untangle all the scrupulous things you did in your past.
Yes, or it might be too late to even start quite. So thank you for that very spiritual thought, Diane. And clearly these things are related to spirituality and not just material things of doing business. I mean, absolutely. I really appreciate this kind of conversation, and thank you very much for sharing that with us. We're nearly at the end of our time for the conversation, and then we'll turn over to Kara Owen in a few minutes. But just a last word from each of you very briefly. What is your advice to a young entrepreneur who faces challenges in their markets or in their business, integrity challenges? So Tang, you go first. And take yourself off mute.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's quick. So for me, I think at first we have to define carefully what our value is and align strictly with that. Surround people with the same value with you. There is a saying like this: there are two types of people in this world, the givers and the takers. The takers sometimes eat better, but the givers always sleep better. And I can guarantee you that.
Okay,
when
thank you very much.
Sleep, yeah.
Thank you, that's great. And Fee, what would you say?
I sleep very well, thank you. My words would be, first of all, make very educated decision, because a lot of people make the wrong decisions because of lack of information. So
get the information.
Yeah, use the toolkit because it's going to help.
Okay.
And secondly, I think integrity is only for big timers and not for small timers. So if you want to make a little bit of money, you know, you can have no integrity, but if you want to do big, live with integrity.
Brilliant, thank you. That's lovely. Edmund.
What do you think? Find that other cigar box. It's lying around there somewhere. You just got to learn how to see it And you do that by hanging around with other entrepreneurs, and they will teach you how to find it.
Thank you very much. We're going to remember, we'll remember your cigar box, that's for sure. Thank you.
That's Eddie cigar box. It's Eddie.
And I'm impressed by the zen of your cat, I have to say. Now, who else have I left out? Diane, did you? Yeah. You're. Oh no, I've asked you, haven't I? Ruel. Sorry, Ruel. Because the pictures are changing up at the top all the time. Go ahead,
Sure.
Ruel. What's your advice to a young entrepreneur who's facing an ethical challenge?
Actually, it's number one is surround yourself with the right people with the right business values. Then the next one is exercise the muscle of saying no or avoiding temptations from small things. Start with small things. Then you'll start to actually get better in doing so.
Very good. Yes, and in our toolkit, we've actually got a section about how to say no. And there are actually about, I've calculated 100 ways of saying no. They're not all in there, but if you do one of the courses that we organize from time to time, then we can go into that in more detail. And finally, Eddie, last word for you. Summarize please for us and give some good advice to all the hundreds of people listening today.
Oh, that's a high bar. There's been a lot discussed today. I'll just answer your last question there, which is remember the stories and the examples of those who shine the light clearly in this, and it will give you your own clarity and strength to do the right thing when it comes.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, thank you all very much for sharing your ideas and your inspiration, and I hope for our audience you found that useful. Of course, you can find us all in LinkedIn and other social media if you want to pursue the discussion in more detail. I think there's some very interesting business ideas. We didn't talk about your companies, unfortunately, we just didn't have time for that, but I would personally really love to know more about what you're all doing in your respective markets. But we are running out of time, and I'd now like to introduce the British High Commissioner to Singapore, Cara Owen, and she's going to launch our toolkit officially and make a few concluding statements. So, Cara.
Brooke, UNDP, and all of the panelists, thank you so much for including me in this discussion. I have really enjoyed it. I was there from the very beginning, and I'm struck at what passion came across around this topic. I'm really inspired because I want entrepreneurs to make money. I really do. I want entrepreneurs to make money because they create jobs and they create values in society and they help solve the problems that societies have. So I was really inspired that people that were on the call are people who have been able to make money. You've got a VC, you've got a money person who is setting out really clearly that acting with integrity isn't just some abstract issue. It's a kind of business related issue where acting with integrity can lead you towards more profitability long term than acting without integrity. I also loved the fact that all of your speakers had really sort of practical examples that they could give to people about the kind of things that you need to think about when you're acting with integrity. I loved Eddie's phrase that the arc of the universe bends towards justice. That's something I would love to believe. I'm a civil servant. I went into what I do because I'm naturally inclined to believe those kinds of things. I believe that we're going to end up in a good place. But I actually think we've got quite a lot of hard evidence to prove that that is right. So for example, the FT, when it looked back at funds that had put ESG at the heart of their operations, they found that the majority of them outperformed those that hadn't put ESG at the heart of what they were doing. The UK has anti-corruption and anti-bribery legislation, which has extraterritorial effects. So if you're a British company and you commit bribery or corruption anywhere around the world, you can face court and justice in the UK for it. And I remember when it was first brought in, there were some questions about whether or not this was going to condemn British firms to be less competitive than other firms that were incorporated elsewhere. actually, in many ways, we have found it to be the opposite. That the fact that a British firm, everybody knows they cannot indulge in these kind of practices, or they will be taken to court in the UK, and all of us have a duty to report on it, gives people confidence to select those type of companies to do business with them. That came through really strongly on what people were saying. You know, if I'm going to do business with somebody and give somebody my money, I want to know that they're going to be really good stewards of it, and I'm going to get it back when I need to. I think this is a really good conversation to be having now as well. You know, we're going through one of the most challenging periods that I can remember in my career, a global pandemic, my goodness. What is that for reminding you about what is important and what is not important? But there are also loads of moral questions laced through it. People who produce personal protective equipment. You know, you're going along, you're producing your gloves, and then all of a sudden everybody's dying to get hold of your gloves, and your market forces would allow you to charge way more for them. What do you do in that kind of circumstance? Something like vaccine production. The UK government, along with the Singapore government where I'm serving, have both been talking about the kind of the moral requirement to make sure that once a vaccine is produced, it can be made available to people all around the world. So we're at a moment of real challenge where people can choose to do good things or less good things. But I also agree with Eddie that this is a moment of real opportunity. You know, we can remake the world. You, the young entrepreneurs, can remake the world in a slightly different way. You can build a critical mass, you and your colleagues, of people who want to act with integrity. And I really hope the Toolkit is going to give you the tools in which to be able to do that. You know, we're at a moment where I truly believe we can choose to build greener, we can choose to build fairer, we can choose to build in a more inclusive way, we can choose to eliminate hazardous waste. We can make all these choices now, bizarrely at a time of crisis, more easily than maybe we could do when we were just chugging along. I'm really struck here in Singapore that when I'm talking to the big money people, that they're absolutely putting ESG at the heart of their investments. Even in a place where maybe even a couple of years ago, things like climate risk, things like social measures wouldn't have featured necessarily as highly. They are now absolutely there at the heart of how people are making business decisions. And COVID has made them double down on that because they're reminded of the folly of ignoring tail risks. As Watson put it towards me. Governance, of course, is absolutely critical. You can't get real E and S if you don't have the G. It's really important that as you're building your companies, you build systems in to make sure that everybody understands what's expected of them and that you catch decision points where you need to make the right choice and not the wrong choice. As somebody who belongs to a big organisation, though, meaning like a government, I think it's really important that everybody keeps some awareness that systems sometimes can obfuscate the moment when you personally can make a real kind of moral choice. So yes, build the right systems to protect your companies, to help guide your future employees, but also remember that very often it's humans that catch something out, sometimes slightly outside of the system. It's them that make the real decisions. Eddie gave you some really great top tips. I've scribbled those down. Those are the kind of things that you can pass on to anybody in any business, I think. I particularly liked what he said about understanding your own values and thinking through in advance how you're going to know when you're getting to a point when you need to make the right decision and what you would do when you're faced with some of these dilemmas, practicing it. Somebody said, practice how to say no, Ruel, I think it was. I really like that. There was one more that I was going to add, which is before I came here, I was on a development program, which was a mixed private sector and public sector development program. And the whole ethos of this development program was how can you develop a kind of critical mass of responsible leadership in really important organizations. So there were major banks there were people from government, there were people from local government, there were some NGOs there were people who ran supermarkets, there were people who ran airlines. And we spent quite a lot of time sharing experiences of when we or people that we knew had been faced with those moments. And a particular concept we looked at was willful blindness, that actually, if we're truly honest with ourselves, sometimes we can have known that something was building in a particular direction, but we'll have closed our eyes to it, we'll have closed our ears to it. And then therefore we can maybe sometimes miss the point at which it was possible to make the right decision and not the wrong one. Keep your mind open, have people that challenge you, use red teaming, make yourself open to feedback, and really keep your mind open to what data is showing you, what your intuition is showing you, what your values are showing you. 2030 is meant to be the year in which we see the Sustainable Development Goals realised. We're not going to get there without entrepreneurs contributing to that. As I said at the beginning, you are the people who are going to help us solve society's problems. So I think there's a question for us all about what is it that we're doing now that is going to make sure that we're proud of ourselves when we get to 2030. I think the toolkit is really great. I'm really pleased that I'm proud that we're associated with it. And it's come through in the conversation. Yes, I understand all of this, but what are the practical tips? I think the toolkit is there exactly to help people who haven't necessarily thought about this in a really structured way to think about what they're going to do to make it much more likely that they'll act with integrity and their businesses will in an enduring way going forward. So I commend it to you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. Thank you for coming on today and finding time to be with us. And again, thank you for the UK government's support for the FairBiz programme. And again, I'd like to also mention Citi Foundation as co-lead of the Youth Collab. So we come to the end of our time together. Thank you all very much for joining us. I want to thank our speakers, everybody from Youth Collab and FairBiz who contributed to the concept design and the writing of the toolkit, to our teams who put together this webinar, and also to the UNDP country offices who have been very active in helping our little publicity campaign around today's webinar and the toolkit. That campaign will continue until the end of this week, but the landing page for the toolkit will be there afterwards, and we'll be populating that with more information about business integrity. So use that as a resource. This event is not a one-off. Maybe it's a new topic for some people, but I think that this needs to be the beginning of a movement. Business integrity is not an aspiration or idealistic dream. We want this to be the reality in the mainstream. And as we recover from the pandemic and start thinking about our new normal, business integrity must become the minimum condition for doing business. So it has to be done together. UNDP is very active around the world, and especially in ASEAN and Asia Pacific, in providing tools. We're also working with the governments in your countries. It's a two-pronged approach, working with business, young entrepreneurs on one hand, but also with the governments and the administrations. And we think that that collective action approach is the way that we might be able to scale this up and get some impact over time. So transforming Asia and the world is not going to be overnight, but it's a combination of your own deep-rooted convictions and moral fiber, some structured training, developed correctly for the audience, for the right kind of audience, and finally, your ability of you as individuals and your companies and our organizations to communicate this in a positive and encouraging and convincing way. Thank you all very much for participating today. You should have access now to the link through the QR code to the Business Integrity Toolkit page. Please use it, and see you soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
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 Thank you, everyone.
See you. See you guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye. Goodbye. I'm going to sign off. It's been nice talking to everybody. Thank you very much.